Welcome. Glad for everybody to be here today. We always start off our meetings with a prayer, and I would ask my chairman, Davey Hyatt, to have a prayer for us, please.
Let's pray. God, we thank you for this new day. Thank you for the sunshine you sent our way. God, we thank you that as we're in this Thanksgiving season, that we can be thankful every day, not just one day a year. God, you've blessed us with so much, and we just simply thank you for that. God, now we pray now you'll be with us during this meeting. We pray that everything that we say and everything that we do will be pleasing and glorifying to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'd like to welcome everybody here. But first of all, I'd like for the House members sitting up here at the desk with us to introduce yourself and tell what House district you're from, please, starting on my right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Lee Hewitt. I represent House District 108, which goes from Mount Pleasant all the way up to Murrells Inlet, Charleston, and Georgetown counties.
Good morning. I'm Roger Kirby from District 61. I live in Lake City, South Carolina, and represent Lower Florence and Marion counties. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Russell Wyatt, House District 93, Calhoun, Orangeburg, and Lexington counties. Thank you.
I'm Davey Hyatt, House District 4, Pickens County.
Rebecca Thompson, the research analyst for the Agriculture Committee.
I'm Bill Hickson. I'm from House District 83, which is Aiken and Edgefield County.
Good morning. I'm Joni Nickel. I'm the Director of Research for the House Agriculture Committee.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Chandra Dillard, represent House District 23 in Greenville County, which is predominantly, the district is predominantly downtown Greenville.
Good morning. I'm Bill Chumley, District 35, Greenville, Spartanburg County.
Good morning. Mike Burns, District 17, Northern Greenville County, God's country.
We lost one of our committee members. She was put on judiciary. We didn't lose her like you thought about, like when I said that. She's still alive and well. The speaker put her on the judiciary. And so she moved off of the agricultural committee. What was that? Oh, anyway, this is an offshore drilling ad hoc committee. It was formed by the speaker to study offshore drilling and testing. This is not a committee that is voting on anything to pass a bill right this minute because we're not in session. We're looking at the pros and cons of offshore drilling. We're looking at the good, the bad, the wonderful, the ugly. We're looking at everything. And that's why we tried to ask anybody who wanted to come speak to us to get with Joni and her staff to sign up to come speak. We've heard from several people over the past few meetings. And this particular meeting, we asked the elected officials, a lot of the elected officials, to come speak to us. So the first few speakers were going to be the elected officials. And then after the elected officials, which would probably be after lunch, we got one more elected official, which would be the Senator Goldfinch. He was going to speak to us after lunch. And then the next, we'll open it up to the regular public speaking. Everybody okay with that? And we asked you to keep your talk up to around 3 minutes. So our first on the agenda today is Mayor Tom Goodwin of the city of Folly Beach. Welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for having me be here. And that's Tim Goodwin, for the record. No problem.
Excuse me.
No problem at all. That's
it
happened
was
more
written
than
correctly.
once.
I said it wrong.
No problem.
Yeah.
It happened more than once. And since I'm here speaking to representatives from the Agricultural, Natural Resources, and Environmental Affairs Committee, I feel like I should be talking about family farms and saving them for the economy of the state. Since I ran a self-harvesting, or commonly known as a U-Picket farm, state certified on Johns Island from 78 to 98 when I moved to the beach. But that's not what fate brought me here to talk to y'all about today. Today we're going to talk about the second largest industry in South Carolina, right behind agriculture. And this depends on who you're talking to, of course, but right behind agriculture, and that's tourism. And the preservation of our coastal regions, our beaches, saltwater marshes, and saltwater estuaries that are so vital to the state in its tourism industry. As we proceed today, you will probably be overwhelmed with facts and figures. And I could go on and on and on about how Little Folly Beach has nearly 1 million non-resident visitors each year, how we contribute to South Carolina's economy with $117 million in sales, create 1,200 jobs, and have 40 million in salaries each year. How we add $22 million to federal, state, and local tax funds every year. But I'm not going to get into all those facts with you guys today. Those facts were collected by the College of Charleston Economic Department for us. And it's just be small in comparison with what you probably hear later on from Myrtle Beach or the city of Charleston. But as mayor of Folly Beach, I'm here to urge each of you to assist in the fight against offshore drilling and sonic testings in the waters off the South Carolina coast. And as chair of the South Carolina Beach Advocates Association, I would like to remind you that every municipal government along the coast has passed a resolution against the use of South Carolina waters for offshore drilling and sonic testing. Now, we've all heard over the years how offshore drilling is safe and about how the environment can be improved but with its platforms acting as artificial reefs to contribute to the fishing community. But I encourage you each to go back and reread about the event that happened April the 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon explosion and spill, to remind yourselves of the terrible effects this event had on the wildlife, the ecosystems, and the tourism economy for the Gulf states, which ultimately led to loss of tourism dollars for many, many years of income for them, and especially to the loss of many jobs as the tourism industry dried up for those states. One spill in the pristine coastal waters of South Carolina we've all had the privilege to enjoy and gone for many years the cleanup begins and the marsh deterioration and estuary to start to decline. Now, they say that you should say that won't happen again for years and years, but let me remind you of an event that happened just 11 days ago. On April the 2nd, 2016, in South Dakota, the Keystone Pipeline, this below-grass pipeline, which is in a much safer environment than the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, spilled an estimated 400 barrels or 16,800 gallons of oil in South Dakota. Boy, we're going to fix that. That'll never happen again, not until November the 17th of 2017. When again in South Dakota, this pipeline spilled an estimated 5,000 barrels or 210,000 gallons of oil in South Dakota. So we're waiting to see what that does to the wildlife, the groundwater, and the people's ability and their quality of life in South Dakota. Now, why do I bring this up? And it's because Senator Campson's not here, so I get to use a few of his words today. As he so many times said, where are you going to bring these offshore pipelines onto the shore of South Carolina? He'll always ask you, how many miles of pipelines or acres or infrastructure do you think it takes to support an offshore drilling process? And then he will ask you to go to Google Earth to Port Fourchon, and that's spelled F-O-U-R-C-H-O-N, Louisiana. Well, I did as he asked, and it was exactly what you need to see. It shows the exact difference between the coast of Louisiana and the Gulf Coast states and the coast of South Carolina. Because the Gulf Coast states are flat and virtually uninhabited because of the bayous and swamps that run right to the Gulf. Whereas in South Carolina, the coast is developed from border to border. Now the question becomes, what beach, city, or town are you willing to destroy to accommodate onshore pipelines, storage tanks, refineries, and shipping stations? A lot of hard questions for people of the state and federal governments to answer. So I've talked a lot about our beautiful coast and protecting it and what seems to be a futile effort to create oil production where there seems to be none. Fortunately, I've spent a lifetime fishing, hunting, shellfish collecting in the coastal waters. And unfortunately, I've been able to pass that on to my son and grandsons. And I hope that's something that can be done for generations to come. And the ecosystem is pristine and beautiful as we've enjoyed today. To close, I tried to come up with a catchy phrase that you'll remember long after this meeting's over with. And after all the facts are gone and you forget the numbers, but a phrase you can remember, hopefully. And the best I could do, I'm sorry, was to come up paraphrasing a line from an old Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams. If you build it, it will leak. As we all know, you build a mechanical device, you put fluid in it under pressure, it will leak. Whether it's an offshore drilling platform, a pipeline, or your automobile. So ladies and gentlemen of the committee, thank you for your time. And just remember, if you build it, it will leak.
We're gonna have an opportunity for people to ask you questions. And,
Okay.
I saw Representative Burns first, and then Representative Ott.
How did you get up here today?
How did I get up here? In an automobile.
In an automobile. So you took a chance on that automobile, right?
I took a great chance on that automobile.
Okay, well, I'm sure you got a reliable automobile. Let me ask you a question. You've, in the figures that you didn't give that you gave, you talked about the $17 million in sales. Is there any, out of all the negative that we talked about this, is there any good at all in this offshore drilling?
For the
That
coastal,
you can find anything good whatsoever
for the coastal waters of South Carolina?
for the state of South Carolina?
No,
Not a thing.
not a thing.
Not even if Folly Beach got $17 million a year in extra revenue, nothing would be good from it.
I don't believe $17 million in revenue would come to Folly Beach every year from it, and one oil spill would destroy that tourism industry for years and years. I still have people coming to Folly Beach from the Gulf Coast that found us when the oil spill was down there years ago, and they decided, hey, we like Folly Beach better than we like the Gulf Coast, so they keep coming back.
I've been to Folly Beach. It's a great place. I wouldn't want it to see it destroyed again. But do you have any? Let me ask you one more question. Do you have any objection to the study to see what's out there if there was a different venue besides the present technology that everybody's aware of?
You're talking about the sonic air
I am
blasting?
indeed talking about that.
If you had a quiet study that you could do that wouldn't affect the ecological system and the fisheries off the coast of South Carolina, I'd be glad to talk to you about it. I haven't seen one, I haven't heard of one. The sonic air blasting is going to be, to me, to put it in Folly Beach terms, like having a never-ending party house next door to your house, and all you hear is boom, boom, boom from the radio continuously 24 hours a day.
Kind of like sitting in your car at a red light, right?
That's it.
And the last question I have for you is, do you know how far these federal waters jurisdiction goes out?
3 miles.
No,
For me.
it begins at 3 miles. Do you know how far it goes
How
out?
far it goes out, I don't know.
200 miles. It's a long way out there. A lot of positives for exploration that you probably don't see any positives in, but that was my first question for you. Did you see anything positive out there?
No, and let me expound on that a little bit. Just in the Post-Inquiry the other day, said right whales are going to show up in South Carolina. Do you think they all stay within the 3 mile limit? I doubt it. They come in from beyond the 3 mile limit, even out to the 200 mile limit coming in. And just to give you an example, the last time we had a renourishment, we had a dredge that sit at 5 miles offshore, and you could see that dredge sitting there every day. And that's a lot smaller than an oil drilling platform. So I don't know whether breaking that horizon would be for an oil drilling platform, but I know it's not 5 miles for a dredge.
Well, we've heard it's about 12 miles, but I'm not sure myself. But I appreciate the opportunity to dialogue with you. Thank you for your
Thank you very
testimony
much.
today.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Ott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for what you do for Folly Beach. I'm one of those, I think you said 1 million visitors that come each and every year. We've been coming as a family to visit Folly Beach every year since I was a child, and absolutely love it. and have a lot of fond memories of spending a lot of time there. I'm going to ask you a question, and it's going to be a question that I would love everyone that comes back up ultimately to answer. So if you can incorporate it into your comments, I won't have to keep asking it. But it's kind of a follow-up to my colleague, Mr. Burns. This situation that we've been discussing now, I think for about 3 or 4 different hearings, is really split into 2. And, you kind of drift over into one issue as you're talking about one. And I think what we were convened for was to discuss the actual testing or exploration of natural gas and oil off of our coast. And then that kind of goes into the actual drilling or harvesting of the oil and the natural gas. So my question to you is, let's just make some assumptions. Let's assume that natural gas and that oil is out there. And according to Mr. Burns, that would then bring a very large economic benefit to the state of South Carolina and our coastal communities if we decided to go out there and drill for it and bring it in somewhere. Who knows where we decide to bring it in. It'd have to be brought in somewhere. But assuming that it is there, would that change your opinion at all whatsoever?
Not for South Carolina, not the way the coastline is developed. Like I said, if you bring it on anywhere in the state of South Carolina along the coastlines, I can't imagine where it would be that you wouldn't be destroying a beach, a town, or some of South Carolina's natural assets that we don't need to get destroyed. I mean, they get built up enough as it is already.
So then it's a pro and con type of situation for you. Maybe there are some pros. Maybe the revenue would be great, but is it at the expense or the risk of what it would do to our coastline and our ultimate economy that it relies so heavily on tourism? Is that what you're essentially saying, is that it's just not worth the chance?
Well, it's like this. When you test out there and you see, if let's assume you find some oil or you find some natural gas and you say, well, we're going to go get it. Now you got to put it somewhere. You admitted that. You got to put it somewhere you don't know where. Again, what city, what town, what municipality, what area you're going to go to and say, we're going to destroy 10 miles of your area, or we're going to take your beach, and it's not going to be here for Folly Beach. It's not going to be here any longer because we're going to turn this into the shore landing place along the coast of South Carolina, which is heavily developed from state North Carolina to Georgia. So I can't see any pros. All I've ever seen or ever read about is cons, because if there is some out there, nobody's come up and said it's more than 2 or 3, 4 days supply for the U.S. Well, it's 4 days supply for the U.S. worth destroying the coast or part of the coast of South Carolina.
But again, even assuming that it's more, I mean, is it worth taking that potential risk?
I just ask you which group you're going to go to and tell them you're going to destroy their area.
Right. So again, I go back. If that is your opinion, that under the assumption that there is a lot of natural gas and a lot of oil there, and you're still of the opinion that even if it was, it would not be the risk that we would pose to our state or our coastline to drill for it and then to bring it in somewhere, help me understand what the logic would be behind even allowing testing then to find out what is out there. If your opinion is not going to change, if you're operating under the assumption that even if you find it and even if it's there, it's still not a good idea for us to proceed with drilling for it.
It's hard for me to convince you to not test or to test for it when I'm totally against testing for it in the manner in which all testing has been provided so far. And there's nothing, like I said, if you're going to go out there and do sonic testing, it's like living next door to the boom, boom, boom 24 hours a day. You're going to destroy the ecosystem. You're going to run the fish off. You're going to run the mammals off. I cannot see any good for the state of South Carolina in the situation we're in today for testing or drilling off the coast of South Carolina.
And so if you don't see any good that would come from the potential drilling, you certainly wouldn't see any good from the testing.
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it, Mayor.
Anybody else? Representative Hewitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Mr. Mayor. Simple question I'll ask you, and I'll take Russell's lead on this. I won't try and ask it again. But it was kind of insinuated during the last meeting that the towns and municipalities that had passed the resolutions that you had talked about, all of them on the coast, had done so without an informed decision. It was kind of an uneducated approach towards it. Do you feel like that your council and you, when they took and voted on this, did so in an educated manner?
I can't answer for anybody else, but I can answer for my council, and the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Mayor Goodwin, for your testimony. It's come to our attention initially when we began these discussions. Sorry. Apparently, the
Wait just a minute.
yeah.
Yeah. We got ETV. Y'all get the privilege of watching was it Ways and Means, the Judiciary, I think. Isn't it? Yeah. Oversight. All right.
He's not going away.
Go ahead, Representative Kirby. You're doing good, Jeffrey. Keep shooting at it. You got a gun, go ahead.
Shoot that thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, thank you again. Just a brief question regarding your opinion as to the different. We've all understood that in federal waters, they're completely really outside of our state's jurisdiction. So the question then becomes: is if the federal government determines, and by all accounts they've made motions toward that it is in effect economic and advisable to do testing off of our coastal areas, and potentially as a next step, possibly even open up for drilling. The question that I have, and I think a lot of our members have, is how do we respond to that federal involvement as a state? Do we just say, we're not interested in this, we don't want it? Or do we try to find avenues to benefit our state for activities that we really don't have a significant amount of control over? Does that?
I understand what you're asking.
Yeah, and that's the thing, I guess, that has been, I know, a quandary for me personally when I think about this issue, is as a state, do we just take a stand and, throw it to the wind, or do we actually try to figure out a way to benefit our state if this activity occurs completely outside of our control? And it very well could. And I guess that's what I would like to just understand your ideas on that, because you're obviously representing a large percentage of of your area, which is a coastal area, and of course would have immediate impact.
The best way I can answer your question, I guess, is to say that one time we thought that this committee wouldn't be here because we had gotten offshore federal waters blocked from testing and drilling. To answer the best I know how to deal with the federal government, after having dealt with the Corps of Engineers and the federal government and National Fish and Wildlife folks over the years for renourishment after renourishment, is you have to take a stand. You have to say, as the state of South Carolina, we do not want this to happen in our state or off our state, in the waters off our state. To try to go in a compromising fashion in to begin with, I think you would be a lose-lose situation for the state of South Carolina. Now, this comes from the guy that people in the Corps, state ports, some other folks didn't want to talk to for a while because of our stand we took on the deepening of the harbor, because we just wanted to know what that was going to do to the downdrift folks after you deepen it. We didn't want to stop anything, but we wanted to see some real scientific evidence of what that was going to do. So if you can, I guess the state goes in and says, if you can show me some real scientific data that this is going to be worth ruining our state for, then we have a different conversation. But I bet you won't get that scientific data from them. And until you force the hand and force the issue. And is there another way to test? Is there another way to go out there and decide whether something's there or not? You know, in all of this today, in all of the technology today, seems to me they could come up with a different way to do it and give you an answer. But as far as I'm concerned, the only way to deal with the federal government is for the state to stand up and say, no, we don't want it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate
you.
you being with us this morning.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Representative Chumley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a pleasure having you here. That Representative Kirby's point was kind of where I was wanting to go with this. With the, we don't have a lot. There's a lot of this we don't have a lot of say-so in. It would seem, other than just taking a stand and fighting for it. But and I want to ask you just one more time too, to make sure I got this right. If the testing, if there was alternative way to testing that was not so intrusive, you would be open to that?
I said we would have a different conversation. I would have to look at what they presented, just like when I said to the Corps, show me your facts and figures, show me your engineering studies. You know, we have to look at what they present, and then you have to have the conversation from there. To tell you what that conversation would be today, I have no clue.
But if it was something that was not intrusive, I'll push it just a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was something that it wasn't noticeable, or something that wasn't harmful to the environment or the wildlife.
If you come up with a process that wasn't noticeable or wasn't harming the wildlife to test, okay. But then if you go out there and test and you say, oh, well, we found this little pocket and we think we can make some money off of it, now you come back to the question of which one of you ladies or gentlemen sitting here on the panel today is going to go to Charleston County or Georgetown County or the city of Georgetown or the city of Folly Beach and say, guess what? You folks got to move because we're getting ready to take over. And that's what will end up happening on the South Carolina coast because of the dense population along the coastline.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So it's not so much the testing then, as you really probably still would be opposed, but I don't want to keep going. I understand what you're saying. I do. We don't need to go through that again. I think I see where you're coming from. Let me just make a comment if I could. You know where Rita's Restaurant is in Folly Beach?
Rita's?
Rita's?
Yes, sir.
You know?
Absolutely, Mr. Hall, I know him well.
I had breakfast there Sunday. I love to go to Folly Beach, and we spent the weekend James Island down there, and I love the coast as much as if I lived there every day. You know, and I guess if I could, I would live there every day, but they don't allow cattle down there. You know, so.
Or chickens.
Or chickens, right? Exactly. But it's a beautiful area, and I love South Carolina, the coast, all of South Carolina, as much as, or more than anybody. I guess what I'm trying to say is I really agonize over a lot of these decisions. We make a lot of hard decisions, and some of them, well, they're all hard. I don't remember an easy one, but anyway, this is something that, I particularly would be looking at from every angle. Because our two major industries, it's exactly the two things I enjoy most, having fun and farming, But it is an issue that is going to require a lot of thought. But I just want to let you know that I certainly will look at it from every angle. I think one little thing that bothers me about this, I'll move on, but if North Carolina does this, or Georgia does this, North Carolina has a lot bigger field than we have in South Carolina. You know, they have a spill there. You know, we're going to suffer from that without any possible upside. You know, so I think there are a lot of things to look at other than just what we're looking for, talking about here now. But anyway, but thank you for your time. I wanted to ask you about the testing thing. I wanted to clear that up in the federal government issue. But I do appreciate it. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Yes, sir. The next up is Mr. Billy Kaiserling, the mayor of Beaufort, and former House member, I believe, and was on the Ag Committee. So welcome home.
Billy Kaiserling, House District 124, Beaufort County. No longer.
Yeah.
Over 20 years, but it's been over 2 decades since I sat on this committee with Tom Rhodes as chairman and then Charlie Sharp. And when I came to the committee, we were talking about what seemed to me to be petty issues. What we're going to do about what kind of hunting in Clarendon County.
That's
what
serious
kind
business.
of traps you can use in Marion County, shrimp baiting down along the coast. And at first I'd sit back and I'd sort of yawn and say, that's their problem. And then I realized that being elected a state representative, I really represented the state. I have to be loyal to my constituents. I have to listen to my constituents. But it may be that sometimes my constituents and I don't agree, but I've been convinced by my colleagues and experts that it was the right decision to make. I believe that this is not a coastal issue. And that's why it doesn't trouble me that we don't have any lawmakers in the hundreds here, down to the lower part of the state. I've heard almost everybody here has been to Farley Beach. Anyone been to Beaufort? Hilton Head? Bluffton? Okay. They belong to you. You ever been on a military base, Parris Island? Marine Corps Air Station? You've seen the F-35 strike fighter? That belongs to you. And so while my colleagues are talking, I'm going to talk about tourism in the context of the locale. I've been at this for 3 years, to Washington 4 times. Was one of the first mayor to pass a resolution, and then worked with Mayor Tecklenburg and the others, to which we got every mayor on the coast. And it's been growing. But I want to talk about 4 quick issues. And that, now that we've established, I hope you would agree that this is a statewide issue. It's not a coastal issue. It's not our problem and the state's opportunity, or our opportunity at the cost of the state. But the first is the basic one. It's one you deal with every day, and that's jobs in the economy. Between tourism and our military presence, we're talking about 300,000 jobs. We're for South Carolina. We're talking about $40 billion in economic impact. And if we put those at risk for the unknown, we have the potential, and it's all potential because we're all speculating, we have the potential of taking a much bigger hit than an oil rig that flies in specialists for 3 weeks at a time before they go home to Texas. I was in an airport in Mexico City and talking to a gentleman. He lives in Mexico City, but he was racing to get back to Houston to go out to the rig where he was going to spend the next 3 weeks. So we're not talking about people coming through our technical colleges. We're talking about importing people who are going to take their salaries home with them on the oil side. The military has been relatively quiet, but when there was a conversation about extending the moratorium on the Gulf after the spill, the Department of Defense, Undersecretary of Defense, said they wanted to extend the moratorium, that the activity off of the Gulf Coast had the potential for interfering with the work on the 3 air bases that are down on the Gulf. the day that Mayor Tecklenburg and I went to Washington to the White House representing about 300 mayors, because there are about 300 of us along the coast from Delaware and Florida, thousands of businesses, and a growing number of state legislators and congressmen as they listen to people. We heard that last day. We happened to be there the day. We came home beating our chests because the morning after we got home from Washington, the Obama administration acknowledged that they were not going to include the South Atlantic or the East Coast in the 5-year plan. But it wasn't us. It was the numbers of people we represented. But I think an important decision, according to, I won't read it, but Sally Jewell, who was the Secretary of the Interior, was the Pentagon. Had concerns about seismic testing and the impact it could have to hidden assets that we have under the sea. And I would say that from my point of view, with my F-35s and my F-18s, and we can go all up and down the North Carolina coast. If you go from the North Virginia, really, all the way down to Florida, you probably have the largest concentration of military bases, certainly in the country. And the fact that any of those could be put at risk is not only a question of our national defense, it's a question of the livelihood of a city like Beaufort, a town like a city like Charleston, and the many others that have their bases. But again, it's tax base and it's people. The legislature has done a commendable job in the last couple of years of creating incentives for military personnel to stay in the state. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So I wonder why we would do anything that would risk keeping them here so that they will retire and hopefully be able to fill some of the skilled workforce jobs. So we've talked a little bit about the economic impact. We've talked about the military. And I've talked really about the opposition from all up and down the coast, and I don't think I need to belabor that point. But I have a question for you, which I don't expect you to answer, but I asked myself this weekend, is whatever happened to the Coastal Zone Management Act, which says when you do something offshore, you must first look at the impact. If you do something off of Folly Beach or Charleston, you need to look at the impact it's going to have. What is going to be the impact on the infrastructure? Who's going to build the roads? Who's going to build the bridges? What kind of safeguards are going to be put there? I don't believe it will be the oil companies. So I believe that rather than looking at this as a coastal region, because I'd really like you to come back to Beaufort, the only thing I'd ask is maybe you could spend a little bit more money, stay a little longer, stop at Folly Beach on your way home, and, you know, there's good food in Charleston. And you can go on up the line through Georgetown and Myrtle Beach, et cetera. But my argument, I have the passion for canoeing, kayaking up these estuaries that are matched by no other place in the world. I have the passion for flying over Beaufort County and seeing that at high tide we're 60% underwater, and at low tide it's 40%. I have a passion when I go out, when I did in the legislature with the fellows from DNR and looked at those people who are coming from all over the state to shrimp bait, or the people who come to the fishing tournaments or to the golf. We have spent so much time. We're getting ready to spend $250 million as a starter on a new bridge to Hilton Head. 250 million. Now, should I build that or should I not? Of course I'm going to build it. I have to worry on the other side about will there be a place to evacuate from because of the rising sea level issue, but we won't get into that. We won't get into that. So as a former House member, as a mayor, as someone who's really spent my whole life in public service, I ask you to just really look at the big picture, because those are 300,000 South Carolinians who are working in the military, who are working in the tourism industry, and that's $44 billion a year that is spent in our state, of which we all get a little piece. I sometimes wish we got as much as y'all did, but that's okay. We're happy with that. I'd be happy, I can't remember all the questions, but one of the questions was if there was another way. I don't know another way. You know, if we were in 1970 and we were in lines at gas stations, I might feel a little differently about this, because then being an American might be bigger than being a South Carolinian. But we're energy independent today. We're exporting, and we're using less. We've got natural gas wellheads that are capped, because we got more natural gas than we can consume or that we can sell. And we're becoming, whether we like it or not, less dependent. So why would we take the risk? There are two separate issues. Seismic testing, you've had an expert who knows a heck of a lot more than I, and I have a constituent. It's interesting. We had a forum in Beaufort, and everybody, went at it, and it was fun. Most of the people there, of course, were opposed to it. But a geophysicist whose background is seismic testing says, "Billy, you're an idiot. It's not going to hurt anything, but at the same time, I wouldn't do it in South Carolina, because we already know there's nothing there." Back in the 80s, we learned, I think it was the 80s, we learned there was little, if anything, there. And then the National Association of Manufacturers, when I cornered them, they said there's no oil in South Carolina. This is a matter of national energy policy. As to the question of what would you do if the federal government pushes us on, that's a fair question. But 3 years ago, when we started, we were headed down that road, and they were gonna impose it on us. But one mayor, 30 cities, 300 cities, county governments, tens of thousands of businesses along the coast put pressure on the administration. As to the money we'll earn, if I'm not mistaken, President Trump recently said, he won't be president forever, that the royalties on leases might not be around much longer, because the states don't need the money. Can you believe that? But so I wouldn't count on those royalties. We're always looking for money from Washington, and they take it from us, but somehow it doesn't all come back anyway. So there was another question, I think.
I had a representative that wanted to ask you a question, a live one. Representative Dillard.
Oh, okay.
It's really not a question. It's really more of a statement.
You're gonna thank me for all my good hard work.
I am, and I come to Beaufort every May for the
Gullah
Gullah Festival. I've seen you
Okay.
there.
I promise you it'll be bigger next year if you come.
And I look forward every year to seeing the economic development positively that's taking place in Beaufort. So thank you for your service. Big fan of your mother's legacy as well, and her service to this state house and this state as well. But I really do want to thank you, because, we're having a different conversation now about one South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And we need to be reminded that we are one South Carolina. As some of our colleagues have been up close and very personal with this nuclear challenge that we've got over in Fairfield County. But it's a state issue. I've got people in Greenville who are mad, and we get our power from Duke Energy, but they realize that we are one South Carolina.
We've all been paying for it.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so when I look at the jobs and the economy numbers that you have shared with us, there are still some unintended consequences as well. I think about folks who are in the upstate who have real estate property. That loss is not in there. Mm-hmm. Or wherever you're from in South Carolina, and there's right. Some unintended consequences, the cost that we haven't even factored into jobs and just the economic impact in general. But so as we continue this conversation, I just want to thank you for that. And you are right. I have asked the experts that have come about the infrastructure. Mayor Goodwin spoke to that about what land mass that it would take and all of that, but nobody has really given us an answer on who does pay for that. So thank you. I think we're talking about a bigger well, we can't talk about a bigger conversation, but we're having a different view of the conversation,
It has to see
of the dialogue. So thank you very much.
One of the questions was, if the feds come, what do you do? I don't give them a building permit. I mean, that's the thing a mayor or a city council can do, and the oil companies don't like that. But I would argue, as Senator Campson has so eloquently said, there is no place in South Carolina, even if there were oil, which I don't believe there is no place that could accommodate that kind of industry. If you look up and down the coast, where is there industry along the coast? Unfortunately, I think, because we got a lot of people who are underemployed, I'd love to see some in Beaufort County, but we've chased them all away because they don't fit in that coastal environment that is so delicate, that is so sensitive, that gives you shrimp and fish and oysters and clams and what have you. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity.
Hold on, I want to give you another question. Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Kiesling, thank you. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your diligence and all your labors in this issue. I did want to ask you to expound on one thing that you mentioned. If I understood you correctly, you said that the Pentagon had indicated that they had issue with the mapping of our coastal of the seafloor. Help me out with that.
They have assets that we don't know about. They have sonar operations that we don't know about, all of which are happening under the water. To be specific, in Beaufort, even though it is not out as far, you may or may not know that I think it runs from Wilmington to Jacksonville. There's a triangle as the coast comes in that is protected airspace, only for use by the military. You may also not know that off of Beaufort or in that area, we have towers with cameras so that our pilots can go out there and do their exercises and then come back and look at the videotapes of what they were doing. So there's machinery and the physical assets that the Pentagon would be concerned about.
And those extend how far out are you?
They're not 200 miles out, but it's still activity. What comes
Sure.
under them? What boats service come in that protected area? It's not, I don't want to mislead you, it's not protected from boating.
No.
But if you started having larger boats coming in there while they were doing their dogfighting.
But just for clarity, then the Pentagon's issue is with their own infrastructure, not with actually having the information available regarding the seabed and the possible geological features of our seabed. That's the point I'm trying to differentiate.
I can't elaborate. I'll go back. I spent the weekend reading everything I could, going back to that date because I so clearly remembered. That's how I learned about the Gulf, that when the Obama administration was on the eve of this decision, they came out and they said that they had assets out there that they thought could be disturbed by seismic testing.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Kirby. Anyone else?
Oh, come on. The other mayor got more questions.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you for what you do, and remember, we are one South Carolina. No matter where you come from in this state, this is going to have an impact on you and the people you represent. Thank you so much for your service, for taking the time, and for having this committee.
Yes, sir. Thank
you.
you so very much. Next up is Mayor Tecklenburg of the City of Charleston. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee
Morning,
members. So thankful that y'all would have us here this morning, mayors and council members, to share with you our concerns about the dangers of offshore drilling and seismic testing off of the South Carolina coast. We believe it would pose dangers to our environment, to our economy, and to our citizens' quality of life. And Mr. Chairman, I brought a copy, although I think I'll have my office send you a more official copy of a resolution that our city council passed unanimously opposing seismic testing and offshore drilling off of the South Carolina coast. And I know there's a lot of general comments that have already been made, so I'm going to focus on a personal experience of mine. It does relate to one point that both Mayors Goodwin and Kaiserland have made, but in fact, I guess my career has been one that I'm one of these guys that took a while to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. In fact, that didn't happen until 2 years ago when I got elected mayor of Charleston, so now I got that figured out. But for the majority of my working life, I was in the oil business. It was an offshoot of a family distribution business. My family was in the jobber business, as they called it, for about 70 years. So I formed a new company in Charleston in the early 80s called Southern Oil Company. And I specialized in marine lubricants. And one of the things that we did or developed was the business of delivering lubricants and then fuels to seagoing vessels. And so I was one of a handful of businesses in the state of South Carolina authorized by the United States Coast Guard based upon all the requirements, federal requirements that you have to meet, to pump oil product from land to across the water to a vessel. I became familiar in that 20-year career of basically every asset, privately and publicly owned in the state of South Carolina, that was on the coast that had anything to do with receiving and shipping oil products. I used to deliver from Jackson, from Wilmington, North Carolina, down to Jacksonville, Florida. So it was really a part of my everyday business for about 20 years. And I must tell you that our assets are very limited in South Carolina to, the receipt and then distribution on land of finished product, gasoline, diesel fuel, and so forth. Very little product was then allowed to be pumped back across the water. In fact, I had to fight the state port authority for the ability to even operate on the state docks because they were so afraid of what would happen if there were a spill. And knock on wood, I never had a spill in the water, although I can attest to Mayor Goodwin's statement that if you build it, it will leak. I have seen leaks in my time, and I've had to clean up a few, but thank God none of them were in the water, but we were always prepared, as you have to be. So I know personally, firsthand, the risks and the dangers of pumping what in my business was just hundreds of thousands of gallons a year across the water. And to multiply that 10 and 100-fold for the millions of gallons, that could potentially be harvested and brought on shore, the risk is just incredible. And there's no industrial real estate to handle it. There's not in the city and harbor of Charleston, and that's where we have the most commercial waterfront property in the state of South Carolina. And it's all dedicated to the Port of Charleston, the State Ports Authority, private port facilities, and now maybe a few condominiums. But there's no commercial. You would need facilities that would encompass thousands of acres of storage alone just to receive the millions of gallons of crude oil. Then we have nowhere to refine it. Are we going to build refineries in South Carolina next? The only one we ever had was in the city of Charleston that Standard Oil built in the 1920s. It lasted until the 60s. I remembered it when I was a little boy. It smelled terribly, and there was this incredible fire in the 1960s. I'll never forget the plume of smoke from that fire, from that refinery that existed in Charleston. It's not a business that we want to be in. It's a risk for spillage. There's no commercial real estate in order to handle We don't want to be a port for Fourchon, Louisiana. We don't want one of those in South Carolina. Where would you put it? On the north Edisto? On the Santee River? On the south Edisto? I'm going to let the folks from Georgetown speak to the Port of Charleston, but we don't, even if we had the real estate, we would not want it in the city of Charleston. So here's another thought for you. You know, we have this incredible facility admittedly in North Charleston, that's managed by Clemson University. It's the largest test cell for wind turbines in the world. And we build wind turbines in Greenville, South Carolina. And I just read in the paper over the weekend that here in Richland County, some firm is coming here to do fiberglass for blades for wind turbines. You know, let's focus on the future and a growing economy rather than one, as Mayor Kaiserling mentioned, hydrocarbons being on the way out. There's plenty of hydrocarbons being harvested in the United States. Let's leave what hydrocarbons rest off the shore of South Carolina. Let's leave them lay where they are. We don't need to harvest them. We don't have the place to store them. We don't have the place to process them. It's a risk to our existing economy. It's a risk to our quality of life. I don't believe it makes sense to risk that quality of life just because some politicians in Washington, D.C. have seemed to have forgotten the age-old adage that oil and water just don't mix. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Did you speak on behalf of liking wind turbines?
Of who?
Do you like wind turbines?
Love them.
So you wouldn't have a problem with those being off the coast of Charleston?
I would not.
So that was been some other areas that we've been exploring, and we've asked some people. Some people didn't want them. Some
Yes,
people
sir.
said they kill birds and other things. Some people said they make great fishing reefs. So you wouldn't have a problem with wind turbines?
No, sir. I think it's a great alternative energy source for the future.
Thank you.
And we're set in South Carolina to build an economy on it.
Right. Yes, sir.
So y'all welcome to come to Charleston anytime.
Oh, yeah. Been there
Yes,
many
sir.
times.
Yes, sir.
Anybody have a question? I can't believe y'all won't ask the mayor of Charleston a question. I mean, really. Lucky we have him here. Thank you for
Wanna know
being
the
here.
best restaurant? No.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Mayor. I appreciate it. How you pronounce the last name? Mr. Mark Lazarus, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. You're the chairman of Horry County Council.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
You pronounced it well. You read the good book.
Oh, yes, sir. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing me to be here today. I represent Horry County, 60 miles of beautiful Grand Strand. I hope all of y'all have been there also and spent your money wisely with us. I find myself in a kind of precarious situation here, a different situation. I'm one that's pushing for economic development, building roads, building a lot of infrastructure. I'm in the amusement park business and expend a lot of fuel in the go-karts that I have and operate. I don't always find myself on the side of the environmentalists or the conservationists or even Team Soda that's here today. But I am here today on their side. That's how important this issue is to me and my fellow colleagues that serve on Horry County Council. The devastation that this particular fault could bring to our economy in Horry County and the state of South Carolina is we are one. We are one. We have a saying in Horry County that we started. It's called Team Horry. That means everybody together. And we're Team South Carolina too, and I believe that wholeheartedly. I think the real question that you've got to ask yourself, and I've heard the questions that came from each of you for the prior members, I think one of the biggest questions that you've really got to ask yourself is the dollars really worth it? Is everything really always about money? I think in this situation it's not. It's not worth it. It's not about the money. We've got an economy that is bursting at the seams in the state of South Carolina. We've got industry moving in here day in and day out. We've got an economic development corporation in Horry County that we just announced a major manufacturer in our county and getting ready to announce several more after the first of the year. You just announced Boeing and Michelin and Volvo and on and on and on that's throughout the state of South Carolina. So our economy's thriving, and we don't have to have offshore drilling. We don't have to take the chance of ruining our fisheries that are thriving today. Thanks to a lot of positions that this state and federal government took, we just opened back up our fishing for red snapper. Mr. Hewitt, you know well, it's thriving. We only did it for a couple of weekends, and the ones that were able to get out in the bad weather did extremely well. Our grouper fisheries are on the rise. We've had the biggest black drum and redfish catches that we've had in years because we've been able to put in the correct way to do things. So this opportunity that's out there, I don't see that it's viable for us or for the state of South Carolina and for our economy. I will take just a second, if you don't mind, indulge me. I'd like to read, and then I'll leave you a copy of the resolution that was passed unanimously by our county council in Horry. It was a resolution expressing the county council's opposition to seismic air gun blasting and offshore drilling in the Atlantic and coastal waters of South Carolina. Whereas the U.S. Department of Interior Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is in the process of opening the Mid and South Atlantic to exploration and development of offshore oil and gas, which will include the use of methods such as seismic air gun blasting. And whereas according to the recent Coastal Carolina University report, tourism in the Grand Strand, Horry, and Georgetown counties is the region's #1 industry, having an economic impact of approximately $7 billion and supporting more than 83,000 jobs, representing over 50% of the total employment across the Grand Strand. And whereas according to a recent American Sport Fishing Association study, saltwater fishing in South Carolina had a total impact of over $1.3 billion, employed nearly 20,000 South Carolinians, and generated over $431 million in salary and wages. Whereas both tourism and recreational and commercial saltwater fishing are vital to the coastal economy of South Carolina and Horry County, and whereas 4 sea turtle species nest on South Carolina beaches, classified as endangered or threatened and protected under the Endangered Species Act, and act with state and local government and their citizens working together for sea turtle preservation and protection in Horry and Georgetown counties, as well as their protection in open ocean waters, which is also essential to survival. And whereas seismic air gun blasting used to search for oil and gas deposits beneath the ocean floor generates explosive and sustained sound for months on end and can disrupt and harm marine mammals, sea turtles, fish, and other wildlife, and whereas offshore drilling historically has caused billions of dollars of damage and environmental harm on every coast of the United States where such drilling has been permitted due to oil spills, wastewater, and required onshore infrastructure. And whereas seismic blasting alone is likely to cause severe economic hardship to the state of South Carolina, as coastal counties adversely impact those citizens and guests who either earn their livelihoods from fishing or come to our area to enjoy the sport or diversion of fishing and increased cost of reduced availability to those who purchase or consume these fish. All at a time when economic job creation and retention is a priority for the state and this council. And whereas just one spill or Deepwater Horizon incident could stigmatize the Grand Strand and threaten the very existence of our economy, both local, statewide, and whereas this threat spurred each municipality along the shoreline in Horry County to pass a resolution in 2015 staunchly opposing seismic blasting and offshore drilling, including the city of Myrtle Beach, the city of North Myrtle Beach, the town of Surfside Beach, the town of Atlantic Beach, and the town of Briar Cliff Acres. And whereas County Council is informed and believes that the slight and speculative benefit of oil and gas exploration and drilling, which would likely accrue to the global energy market, is not worth the risk of even a single incident that would cripple our local and statewide economy. That's a resolution that was passed unanimously by our county council. I'll be glad to leave copies of that for you here on the dais or on the table. That concludes really what I have to say. I think I've said it pretty succinctly that we're opposed for many reasons, the economy being one, and the livelihood of all of our individuals in Horry and Georgetown County, and maintaining the pristine beaches that we do have. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lazarus, thank you, and thank you for what you do for the citizens of Horry County. Your works do not go unnoticed, as you know. I was just curious, though. Have you had opportunity? We're discussing really a federal issue here.
Yes.
Have you had opportunity to talk to Congressman Rice? Have you had opportunity to sit down with him and say, where are we on the federal level on this issue? And if you have, would you mind sharing that information with us?
I haven't, as of late, gotten into deep conversation with him, as I have had the same conversations with Senator Goldfinch on this same issue. I cannot speak for Congressman Rice, but I think maybe we're turning the corner. But I couldn't say that, give any opinion of where he is on that.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
What is your feeling on the wind turbines?
As you know, the city of North Myrtle Beach has invested heavily in it. We have several wind turbines that are on shore that they have been testing through several different agencies. So that's something that I believe is viable. As my colleague from Charleston said, I think it's something that is an alternative energy source. We're starting to look into a lot of solar energy. I've got 2 presentations before our county council coming up now on solar farms. So we're certainly looking at that in the vast amount of farmland that we have, turning some of it into solar farms. So I think there's options out there for us to look at that won't be a detriment to our economy.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lazarus. I have a quick question. This is just a comment. Was it unanimous when you hired your administrator from down there?
Well, fortunately for him, I wasn't the chairman at the time.
You're probably right. In case you don't know,
he's doing a great job.
He's a good Pickens County boy, so we're glad to send him your way.
Yes,
so.
sir. We're glad to have him. Thank you.
Representative Hewitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard, the other areas talk about infrastructure, and we know how hard it is for you just to be able to try and get a road built to handle what we have in place now. And in Horry County, you basically have got one location that would be there to support any type of offshore facilities. That would be in Little River. What kind of impact would you see with the infrastructure that you hear that it would take to help support an industry like that, on top of fighting the battles that you're fighting now to try and get roads built on our overcrowded situation we have now? Is there any place that you could see that could support any type of infrastructure for this industry?
I can't imagine where. We're fighting as hard as we can to get I-73 built, and we've got some opposition that's in the audience today to that, so to get us an interstate. So I don't know where we would ever get the trucks in and out of there.
Yeah, that was what I was curious, because I know what it's like, just traffic now, trying to handle what we have. Thank you.
Thank you, yes, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Representative Ott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for your testimony. Again, I'm kind of going back to that same question. So just help me understand that if I am opposed to offshore drilling, if I'm opposed to putting our coastline at risk to allow the drilling, the harvesting, and then the importation, essentially, of that oil or natural gas into our coast and the infrastructure that it would allow, help me understand then again why I would be supportive of the testing. We have heard extensive testimony, throughout these hearings, And the way the federal government ultimately has it set up with the process is that once you allow the testing, that is essentially the first step or the first domino in the process ultimately of drilling. So just, again, I'm struggling with that. I'm trying to put those pieces together. Why would someone who does not think it's a good idea to drill for oil and natural gas off of our coast, why does the testing matter? Help me understand that.
I would ask the same question. I would be wondering why you would be for it under the testimony they're given today. The effect that the testing that they have today would affect our fisheries. We truly believe that, and that's a thriving economy that we have. We talked about the nesting sea turtles and those types of things. So why would you support the testing when it could be as much a detriment to our wildlife and our economy as it could be to actually doing the drilling itself? So I don't know why you would. There's got to be other ways. I fish a lot. I like to go out and, you know, I can read on my GPS now, on my Garmin, I can tell you where the fish are. I can tell you what's on the bottom of the ocean and everything else. There's got to be a better way if they really want to know what's there, other than having to have loud sounds blasting, running our sea mammals off of the coast. I just don't see that happening.
But again, and I'm trying to figure out the correct way to ask this, but, so it's only an assumption. Let's assume that the testing came back and found tons of oil, tons of natural gas off of the coast of South Carolina. Would your testimony then change? Would your opinion then change as far as it relates to the drilling for that oil and that natural gas?
No, it wouldn't. As I said at the beginning of my testimony, is it really all about money? Money's not about everything. We've got a great economy. We've got a great state. And I would, for any amount of money, I would not want to see us ruin that.
I tend to agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to follow up on a little bit of a line of questioning, and I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your questioning to the folks that are testifying about wind turbines off of the coast. But I just want to take that question a little bit further and not just ask you, are you supportive of offshore wind turbines or onshore wind turbines, but give me a little bit more as to what you see the difference between an offshore wind turbine being and a natural gas oil rig off of the coast of South Carolina. Help me understand. I see a huge difference between the two, basically because of what we're going to be bringing in and then what the requirements onshore are going to be for those two. But I was just wondering if you could help articulate that.
If your problem is a visual effect that you may see miles out, then you may not be for the wind turbines, because the only negative I can see to the wind turbines is the visual effect as you're laying on the beach enjoying the day, that you see these wind turbines offshore. What they don't do is create the negative effect of any type of oil spills or anything of that nature that could affect our economy. And on top of that, you don't have to do seismic testing to be able to go put a wind turbine in. All I got to do is stick my finger in there, make sure the wind's blowing.
Thank you for that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And then just again, we are hearing from public officials, and so you make the assumption that the public officials, the mayors and people like you, the chairman of county council, are speaking on behalf of your constituents. Is that a fair assumption, Mr. Chairman, or do you represent people that have come to you and said, you know what, we do support this. We do support seismic testing, and we do support the offshore drilling for natural gas and oil. Have you heard much of that from the people you represent in Horry County?
I have not. Most of the people that I've heard from are opposed to it.
Okay, so then just taking that a step further, the folks that would be, can you help speculate as to what, again, the motivations would be of the people that are going to be supporting this endeavor?
I would say the false sense of financial opportunity and gain would be one, and then the other is their envision, maybe not educated enough to think that we will become self-supportive and away from other means of oil production from other countries.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Lazarus. Again, just a quick follow-up. I'm a little bit confused on the seismic testing part as it relates to wind. We had some testimony, and please correct me if I misunderstood it, that there was seismic testing presently going on in North Carolina waters, because there has to be, as I understood it, there had to be information assembled to determine whether wind turbines, how to properly seat them, in effect. But I think I just heard you say that wind did not require seismic testing. I just want I want some clarity on that, if you don't mind.
To my knowledge, I could be refuted in that, but to my knowledge, I wouldn't know why you would need seismic testing to find what type of resources are underneath the ground. We're using the wind to produce the energy, not the energy that's being produced out of the ground.
Right, okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Representative Kirby, we remember them talking about you had to drill a certain depth to be able to anchor the wind turbine. Is something that was talked about. They had to do some kind of testing to see what kind of soil or rock what kind of soil or rock was down there. Just like you would a foundation of a house, you needed to know what was there, where you need pilings or whatever. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'd like to welcome Representative McCoy. Thanks for being with us. A great Charleston representative. Trying to find out, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Glad to be here, and he and I served on the House committee dealing with the scanner situations and with the co-op situation, and thank you for doing a great job on that. So, thanks for being with us today. Representative Ott, you were there with us too, weren't you, Vice Chairman? Yeah. All right. Representative Al Joseph, Georgetown City Council. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about facts and figures. You know those, and you've heard them, I'm sure, repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly. For me, this is as much personal as it is political. My family has been in Georgetown for well over 100 years. They came to Georgetown and opened restaurants, retail stores. They were merchants. So I have a very strong tie to the city of Georgetown. So this is as much personal as it is anything else. After a 26-year career, after leaving Georgetown College in a 26-year career, I moved back. It's my choice. I decided I wanted to move back to my hometown to try to make a difference. For 6 years, I was involved with Rotary, with various boards, Chamber of Commerce, with Georgetown Business Association. My passion was to promote the city of Georgetown and help move it forward. At a certain point, when I felt I had done all I could do from a civic side, is when I decided it was time to start moving more to the policy side and decided to run for city council. So I've spent the last 7 years since I moved back to Georgetown with a passion to promote the city, to let others know of this gem of a city that we have that a lot of people don't know about, and to continue to try to move it forward, tourism, economic development. Georgetown is right now at a crossroads. And we have heard that and we have said that over the last several years. We've heard this before, but never has it been more true. We are in the process of bringing a high-end boutique hotel to our historic district in Front Street. We're in the process of working on rezoning of the steel mill property. We are in negotiations with new housing developments and new apartment complexes within the city of Georgetown. So we are doing things in the city that are moving it forward. Georgetown and Georgetown County is very unique. We have a convergence of 5 rivers. We have a bay. We have a harbor. We have the ocean. Where else on the eastern seaboard do you find that? I'm not aware of anywhere. If there is one, I'm not aware of it, where you have that confluence of water and maritime that we have in the city and the county of Georgetown. The economics don't work. We don't need to talk just about Georgetown. The entire state benefits greatly from the tourism and from the revenue generated in coastal communities. It trickles through the entire state. So it's not just talking about Georgetown and the coastal communities. So the economics don't work if we lose the revenue we have now from tourism and from all the other things we have in the coastal communities, which we will lose if we end up with oil derricks off our coast. We've heard a little bit of talk about safety. I'm certainly not going to take the next 10 minutes and list the hundreds and hundreds of oil spills that we all have heard about, but we talk about being safe and it can't happen to us. Certainly it can. March 2014 in Texas, October 2014 in Louisiana, September 2016 in Alabama, May 2017 in New York, November 2017 in South Dakota, and let's remember that same pipeline in South Dakota was also in April of 2016. These are just a few within the last 3 years. We don't need to take the chance off the coast of South Carolina of this happening to us. To Representative Ott's point, there is talk about seismic testing being voted on and talked about independently of offshore drilling. There is no such thing as independently when you're talking about seismic testing and offshore drilling. These two cannot be separated. It simply cannot. I want to be clear, seismic testing is the first step in the drilling process, and any vote on seismic testing is going to be interpreted as a vote for drilling. Very clear on that. You cannot separate those two. To Representative Kirby's point, we would view this as a matter of federal intrusion. As I think most of you know, in our history in South Carolina, we are a little bit opposed to federal intrusion. We need the support of South Carolinians throughout the state to protect our coastal waters, and there are things that we can do. As has been said before by one of my colleagues, there are going to need to be building permits issued. There are going to need to be incentives discussed. Not in Georgetown. It's not going to happen. I have a question for you. How would your constituents react if they lived on the coast? I don't believe we have anyone here from a coastal area, so would you vote against their wishes? And to a point that was also made is, have we talked to our constituents? Yes, I have. I have talked to and had constituents come to city council meetings and public comments when we passed our unanimous resolution opposing offshore drilling and seismic testing. Overwhelmingly, they are opposed to this in the city of Georgetown. I have a question. Why is there a need to drill in the Atlantic in my backyard? I don't believe there's a need for it. We have a surplus. And for the first time in American history, oil and gas industries are allowed to export United States-produced oil. The Cove Point facility is ready for business, and all the United States gas they receive is fully contracted to go to Japan and to India. So how will you answer your constituents when they ask, why did we send our U.S. oil to other countries? What is the point of ruining the South Carolina coastline to get more oil that we obviously don't need if we're already exporting? We did have a unanimous resolution that was passed in the city of Georgetown, as every coastal city and municipality along the state of South Carolina has done. We've heard that and everyone has talked about that, but I don't know that we understand just how resounding a voice that is. Every coastal city in the state of South Carolina has said the same thing. We can't all be wrong. There's truth to that. There's weight behind those resolutions. When you have that many people saying the same thing, I think it tells you something. I'm going to be brief because I don't want to repeat what has been said by my colleagues and what will be said after me, but I will leave you with this. When we talk about the potential for offshore drilling, for seismic testing, we talk about the potential for the revenue, we talk about the potential for employment and for jobs, which I don't believe will happen with South Carolina citizens if we do bring it in. We hear a lot about the potential. I will say this to you. If one tar ball washes up on Pawleys Island, it is not worth it. Thank you. Are there any questions I'll be happy to answer?
I'll ask one.
Yes, sir.
So how do you feel about the wind turbines?
I'm in favor of it. I've actually been in North Charleston and the Cherry Grove area where they have those. I work with a group in Georgetown. This is independent of City Council, called the Working Waterfront Coalition. It's a group we've put together to enhance and bring more of a working waterfront into Georgetown. And I work with Coastal Carolina on that. Coastal is one of the entities that is working on the wind turbines in the North Myrtle Beach and Cherry Grove area.
But the reason I ask everybody, we've had some people that don't want anything. So that's
Absolutely.
why you're representing your council and
Yes.
your
I
mayors
would,
and
I
your
would say
towns.
to you that I am in favor of it at this point without being as knowledgeable as I would like to be about it.
Good answer.
But certainly as an alternative to offshore drilling, yes, sir.
Yeah. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next up is Mike Seekings, Charleston City Council.
Thank you,
Y'all-
Mr. Chairman.
Y'all ride together?
We did ride together.
Oh, good. Saving energy, right?
As apropos of one of my jobs I'm going to talk about today, I actually was the driver today. Mr. Chairman, members of the council, members of the committee, thank you for having me. I'd like to acknowledge my representative, Peter McCoy, who's been a steadfast supporter of us in Charleston on this issue. Just about everything that I could have said has been said today. I get to go last to fill in a few things, but I'd like to answer a question that was asked first, and that is, have I had a chance to talk to my constituents about this? And the answer is no, because they talked to us about it long before we can get to them. When the mayor drove up this morning, my constituent at 6:30 in the morning was standing on my street talking to me, and these are big issues. Why am I here? I am a member of Charleston City Council. My district is District 8, which is historic downtown Charleston. I'm the proud mayor pro tem of the city of Charleston. I'm also the chairman of the Regional Transportation Authority. We run our buses on fossil fuels. I'd like to talk about that for a second, Representative Burns. I sit on the board of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. But maybe most importantly, I'm the grandson of a farmer. I'm a runner along the coast, and I'm a trained geologist. In fact, I'm a trained geophysicist, which is rare these days in the world of elected officials in South Carolina. The question I think I'd like to answer to you first is this. Tourism, which the numbers are staggering, just in Charleston County, it's $4.2 billion a year of economic development. It has so many jobs, it's hard to even figure out which ones are there. Does tourism and the oil industry's infrastructure, can they peaceably coexist? You've heard about a coastline that is currently basically built out for what we do. When I'm not doing all the things I told you about, I'm a lawyer. I have an office in Charleston, I have an office in Hilton Head, and I have an office in Horry County. So we travel the coastline basically every week and see what's going on. Can you peaceably coexist with an industry that needs hardware to exist with what we've got out there? And I think the answer, in fact, I know the answer is no. The infrastructure for the economy that we rely on, which is tourism, and not just tourism, but an economy that is self-sufficient with the people who live on a coast, fishing, as the chairman talked about, and all the things that go along with the coast, is what we thrive on what we live on. And in order to build a second infrastructure, it would have to go right over the top of that. That's just not economically viable. It's not economically viable. Now, Representative Ott, you've asked the same question a few times. It's a great question. If you're against drilling, why on earth would you even be here talking about seismic testing? And that's a great question. And I would like to point out something. Someone also asked, have we talked to our congressman about this? And ours is Mark Sanford, and I've talked to him at length about this. And one of the proposals in the leases that are to go out for not just the drilling but the testing, in those leases is a provision in there that the data that comes from the seismic testing that is gathered by people who have leases with the government, which are private leases, that data is not available for public consumption. Not available for you, not available for me, not available for anybody out here. It just goes to Washington into whatever hole goes out there. Now, that is not transparent. And what it tells me is it's somewhat of a boondoggle. Now, I told you I'm a trained geologist, and I am. I actually wrote a thesis in structural geology. And Mayor Kaiserling talked about back in the 70s being in lines for gas and all those things, and that would have been a time of nationalism where maybe we would have thought about going off the coast of South Carolina to look for oil. Well, they did. Back in the 70s, that was the biggest time of oil exploration in the history of the United States. We had oil embargoes. People were looking for any source of energy. I'm here to tell you, I can't see the future, none of us can, but I predict with some certainty we, in our lifetime, will never see an oil rig off the shores of South Carolina for two reasons. One, because of the political will of, among others, you and us. But more importantly, it's just not there. There's no oil out there. If there was, there'd have been a grab a long time ago. A long time ago. So here we are in this committee, and you're looking for both sides of the argument. You've heard this morning from elected officials, all of whom have come with an impassioned plea to you to say, look, we don't need this. We don't need it for the people we represent. We don't need it for the people who come and visit. And we don't need another second economy that's already built out and working. In Charleston, we invite 6 million visitors a year to come visit us. Every single one accepts. We invite all of you to come. We have 6 million tourists a year. It is an economy that is booming and has ripple effects throughout the entire state. We have a port that's growing. We have imports and exports that go through there that we've never seen the likes of any time in South Carolina. Why put any of that at risk over something that is uncertain, that is prospective, that there is no data out there that's credible today to suggest that there are massive reserves out there that would require infrastructure on our land side that is incompatible with what we do? It makes no sense. The business model that we have works. We on the coast of South Carolina are proud of who we are and what we do every day. And it would be a mistake for us if we didn't come before you and say, who we are and what we do as South Carolinians is to protect the very state that we love, the coastline that drives a good part of our economy and what defines us. And to allow someone else to come in and try to change that way of doing things I would humbly suggest to all of you be a mistake. And the question is, what do we do? This is offshore. This is the feds. What we do is what we always done. And I heard others say, we fight it. We fight it. And we're ready to fight it. And I can tell you, in my little District 8, which is, it's amazing there's only 10,000 people in that district. They seem to be a little louder than that, Representative McCoy. And they don't seem to sleep very often. I can tell you, I can tell you to a man and a woman that they do not want to see infrastructure off the coast. There's no reserves out there, and the first step, seismic testing, will simply do nothing but divide our communities, not bring them together. So thank you for having us all. I know I'm the person between you and a break and probably lunch. I appreciate you having me up here, and I'd like to thank all my fellow elected officials for being here. This is a super important issue for us, not just on the coast, but in the state. Representative Dillard, we're all one South Carolina. I started, by the way, my career up in Spartanburg and Greenville, working for Judge Donald Russell. May he rest in peace. And I can tell you, for someone who was the governor of this state, he would look at us right now and say, we're doing the right thing by fighting, by fighting, by fighting. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Keep Representative McCoy straight down there.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. John Thomas, Georgetown County Council.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me to be here today. I'm John Thomas, an elected member of Georgetown County Council. I grew up here in Columbia. My parents took me to Pawleys Island on vacations when I was little. Now I live there near the beach, where I have the appreciation of what a resource the South Carolina coast is and how the oil business is not compatible with it. I am here to convey to you that the people of coastal South Carolina, and certainly those that I represent, oppose offshore drilling and seismic surveys. I say that with confidence because over the past 2 years I have attended or been informed about scores of town hall type meetings all along the coastal region where people have discussed offshore drilling, and the vast majority have made an informed decision to oppose it. The people of coastal South Carolina have expressed their opposition directly and through their many local elected officials. In my county, Georgetown, after listening to our constituents, County Council voted unanimously to enact a resolution opposing seismic testing and offshore drilling activities. Georgetown County joined in opposing offshore oil drilling and seismic testing. Charleston County, Horry County, and every municipality along the entire South Carolina coast, including North Myrtle Beach, Atlantic Beach, Surfside Beach, Pawleys Island, Georgetown, McClellanville, Mount Pleasant, Isle of Palms, Sullivan's Island, Charleston, James Island, Folly Beach, Edisto Beach, Port Royal, Hilton Head, and Beaufort. My constituents have clearly said they do not want oil and gas drilling off the South Carolina coast because of the very real threat of a drilling disaster and the resulting severe environmental and economic harm it would bring to our area. South Carolina's coastal tourism economy, which supports 130,000 jobs and generates more than $10 billion annually, relies on a healthy coast and ocean for fishing, tourism, and recreation industries. Offshore drilling would threaten our tourist economy and jobs because oil spills are not a question of if, but when. Every United States coast where offshore drilling has taken place, and I can list them if you want, has suffered multiple spills and billions of dollars in environmental and economic damages. The Atlantic coast would be no different. My constituents and the vast majority of people in coastal South Carolina communities have made their informed decision to oppose offshore drilling because they have heard the oil industry's claims, repeated by some before this committee, and have also heard well-researched rebuttals to those claims. Offshore drilling advocates claim that $3.7 billion in new revenues will come to South Carolina, over 35,000 new jobs will come to South Carolina, and that a port like Georgetown can be the hub for servicing related offshore oil and gas development. Those estimates of revenues and jobs come from a report commonly called the Quest Report, which was paid for by the American Petroleum Institute. The analysis claims contained in the Quest Report have been refuted for several years. Even Bonnie Loomis, Executive Director of the South Carolina Petroleum Council, a division of the American Petroleum Institute, who testified before this committee, says the report is inaccurate. But drilling advocates continue to quote the Quest Report, even though the flaws in its analysis are apparent to anyone who looks at it closely. The $3.7 billion, cumulative over 14 years, in new revenue is more like $0, since the Trump administration has said there will be no revenue sharing in the Atlantic. As for the 35,000 new jobs, there are a lot of problems with that estimate, but most important is that the workers in the oil business are highly trained and very experienced nomads who work on rotational schedules. They fly in and work for 2 weeks, then fly home to Texas or Louisiana for 2 weeks off. They will not move to South Carolina and not contribute to the local economy on their time off. These will not be local jobs. And finally, the people of Georgetown City and County do not want the port to become the next Port Fourchon. And they do not want the accompanying onshore oil infrastructure that would ruin our coastline. To borrow from Senator Campson, my constituents have looked on Google Maps at all the oil business industrialization in places like Port Fourchon, Louisiana, Morgan City, Louisiana, Deer Park, Texas, and Beaumont, Texas. And clearly, they have said they do not want that here. In fact, there's no place along the coastal South Carolina for the onshore infrastructure that would accompany offshore drilling. Where? Not in the Santee Delta Coastal Reserve, not in the Yawkey Wildlife Reserve, not in Bear Island or anywhere in the Ace Basin, certainly not in Kiowa or Seabrook. There's no place to put the degree of industrialization that would occur to support offshore drilling. To summarize, please listen to the people of coastal South Carolina who are opposed to offshore drilling and would be the ones who would bear the risks that oil business would bring. They do not want the accompanying shore infrastructure, and there is no place to put it. It is not in the economic interest of the state of South Carolina or its residents to support drilling in the Atlantic. On behalf of my constituents and the expressed desire of the people of the entire region, coastal region of South Carolina, I urge this committee to make recommendations to the legislature to oppose both seismic testing and offshore drilling in the South Atlantic. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Any questions? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
That was our last elected official. We still have some time that we need to burn, so we'll start on the public comments. The first one on public comments is Rick Baum, I believe, with the seafood industry.
Bauman. I'm from Murrells Inlet, South Carolina.
Will you pronounce your last name again?
Bauman.
Bauman. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And I'm from Murrells Inlet, South Carolina, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak. For the last 50-plus years, I've been involved in recreational and commercial fishing activities on the South Carolina coast. I'm the founder of Murrells Inlet Seafood, and I'm a board member of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce. The seafood industry is a very integral part of our coastal economy. Numerous people have moved to our coast because of the quality of our outdoor heritage, including our recreational fisheries. Visitors and residents alike flock to our coastal seafood restaurants and markets because of our commercial fisheries that supply them. But the fishing industry and the seafood industry have been under a great deal of stress for several years due to heavy-handed federal and state regulations designed to stabilize and increase our fishing stocks. Folks in the industry have been working with government agencies for many years with the goal of developing and maintaining sustainable fishing stocks. We have slot limits and minimum size limits on many species. We have long-term closures and seasonal closures on others. There are catch quotas on how many pounds of commercially valuable species can be caught each year. Where there is no money in the budget for real-time science to manage these fisheries, which is a travesty in itself, the precautionary principle is in place via these regulations. All of this to protect and build up populations of our ocean life. In addition, there are excluder devices required for all shrimping trawlers to protect the protect the sustainability of other species from the catch. There are shellfish ground closures to encourage sustainability and protect the public from the bacteria and pollution associated with development and stormwater runoff. The seafood industry complies with these regulations and others at great expense in order to protect our natural resources for future generations to enjoy. But now we have these ridiculous proposals for seismic blasting and offshore drilling before us. And I really got to stand up straight and say what I mean about this, because it's very personal. The federal government's own environmental impact statement predicts that seismic blasting will cause great harm or death to hundreds of thousands of ocean mammals and many millions of other ocean species. And recent science has provided hard evidence that commercial seafood catches are severely reduced and populations greatly displaced during and long after periods of seismic blasting. And to answer the fine question from you, sir, if you don't want offshore drilling, why in the hell would you do seismic blasting in the first place? It don't make any sense. These are the same resources that me and my industry have been forced to conserve with all these government regulations, and the same government is seriously considering allowing the oil industry to degrade those resources solely for the corporate profits and energy exports. It's not about American energy independence. That's hogwash. Is this a cruel hoax or just a bad dream? In closing, I will tell you in no uncertain terms that I stand with the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, the New England Fisheries Management Council, the Southern Shrimp Alliance, the International Game Fish Association, the Billfish Foundation, the Southeastern Fisheries Association, and over 50 other commercial and recreational fishing entities who have written BOEM in opposition to this stuff. A few months ago, I went to Washington with business leaders from Maine to Miami and had the opportunity to meet with Director Cruikshank and his board at BOEM. We pointed out the unanimous opposition to these activities of so many hundreds of communities on the East Coast and counties, including every coastal community and county in South Carolina, and I asked the director if he had received even one letter or resolution from any county or community in support of seismic and drilling. Gentlemen and ladies, the room went silent. Folks, I respectfully request that you interject some common sense into this decision. Please reject the fallacious rubbish, that's what it is, being spread around by big oil and their minions, and you know who they are. And I recommend rejection of these ridiculous ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that very much. Any questions? Next up is, I believe it's Mac Hyman.
Mal Hyman, professor of sociology, Coker College, Hartsville. Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
members of the committee, appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. My couple minutes, I'm going to speak to something different, a broader set of questions that you have to confront. Borrowing from the Pentagon report, the quadrennial report in 2003, confirmed twice with other Pentagon quadrennial reports about the impact of climate change on national security. The Pentagon, back in 2003, said that climate change is a greater threat to our national security than terrorism. Things are different than when we built some of those wells off the coast of Louisiana and then the Gulf Coast. We weren't as energy sufficient back then. We didn't understand the impact of a BP oil spill and what happened with the Deepwater Horizon. And we understand much more about climate change. From the Pentagon report, they talked about climate change causing more drought, floods, famine, mass migration, political instability. If I could direct your memory to the floods in Pakistan back in 2008, covered about 1/6 of the country. The government was unable to step into the breach to protect people. The Taliban did. They provided doctors, they provided water, and they gained support, and the Pentagon knows that. The drought spreading in southern Sahara, Boko Haram has stepped into the breach. In Syria, it was a contributing factor to the civil war there. 4 years of an extended drought, a 900-year drought, was a catalyst for the war in Syria that's continuing to this day. In Yemen, the drought has been a contributing factor. The Pentagon calls it a catalyst for war. We've seen this also with the drought in southern Sudan. The drought there has been a significant contributing factor to the war in southern Sudan that goes on this day. We've seen larger floods from larger hurricanes, unprecedented. So in addition to the concerns that have been mentioned here, I submit the great challenge of looking beyond our borders to make us global citizens. We're all in the same planet. Our fates are tied like never before. The world looks at us, and this is a time when we don't need to sell the oil. We won't gain the oil for South Carolina. It's going to be sold on the world market, and at this point, there's not a need for us to be drilling for more oil. We've already got more resources in terms of fossil fuels than we know what to do with. The Pentagon also realizes that if all of the found resources are developed, it's very, very dangerous for the planet. This would pass us far beyond the Paris Accords. So I would submit that we think of this also as global citizens. Look at the possibilities for alternative energy. They're growing very quickly to provide opportunities, but also to take a good look at what the risks will be for future generations. Thank you. There may be some questions.
Thank you, Mal. I don't believe so.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Appreciate you being here today. Next is Ed Yaw. Is it Y-A-W? Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
I have a graphic that I would like to pass out if you can follow along with me, because it might be a little easier.
Yes, sir. And you're with Soda?
I'm with Soda.
Right.
I'm a
Will you
retired-
explain soda for some of us?
Yes.
I know some of us do, but the folks that might be watching on
That's right.
ETV might not.
I'm a retired systems analyst, and I live in North Litchfield Beach. I keep hearing, we have to know what's out there. We have to know what's out there. All of these politicians have to know what's out there. So I decided, well, maybe I want to know what's out there. So what would it take for me to find that out? So the first thing I did was I started researching information about what it takes to do offshore seismic testing. I read articles by the oil industry that says they were addressed to people who actually want to do drilling, and they said, this is what it's going to cost you to do it. $40,000 a square mile to do offshore seismic testing. They're putting 330,000 miles in play. That means you're talking about $13.2 billion to do the seismic testing. Now that's divided up among 5 companies. So maybe $2.7 billion per test. But you can't just go out and say, I want to look at one of them, because they're not doing the entire area. What you're ending up with is a piece of the action, and the oil companies are willing to gamble on that because they don't buy it from everybody, they only buy it from one. On the second line, there's a picture of what the results of a seismic test actually look like. It's a bunch of squiggly lines and false colors have been put in there to indicate what kind of rock is underneath the ocean. You need somebody to analyze it for you, and he's going to look at that and say, here's the best place, I think, where you can drill. He doesn't look at it and say, oh, there's a great big cavern of oil out here. He can't see that from that. So the only way to actually know what's out there is to drill for it. You got to drill a test hole. Well, you got to have some sort of infrastructure to support that drilling out there. You can't take an oil rig off 50 miles offshore and expect it to drill, because they got to have maybe 10 miles of pipe available to them. They got to support a staff of 40 or 50 people. They have to provide them with food, water. They got to fly them back and forth because they don't work there constantly. They got to haul the garbage away. And an oil rig burns about 3,000 gallons of diesel fuel an hour. So you got to have trucks, ships trucking that stuff out there so that they can power themselves. So I have no idea how much it costs to do something like that. So I just left that out of the equation altogether and put question marks on it. However, to actually drill a test hole, which is what has to be done in order to say this is what's out there, you're looking at a drill rig, which is about $350 million. These numbers, by the way, are coming from the federal government's study on what happened to the Deepwater Horizon. This is the numbers the Deepwater Horizon was using. BP had a budget of $96 million to drill the hole in the Macondo well. They were actually over budget by $40 million before the rig blew up and sank. So you can't really count it. I mean, I'm conservative. I'm going with the low numbers on all of these things. That $40,000 in a square mile runs from 40 to 100,000, depending on what gets in your way. Hurricanes, pesky animals out there, you have to stop your seismic testing and whatnot. At any rate, you're looking at a total of $13,646 million minimum to find out what's out there. Now, I don't have that kind of money to spread around. In fact, the only people with deep pockets like that are the oil industry. So when somebody says we have to know what is out there, what they're really saying is, I want to let the oil industry go out there and dig holes, because nobody's going to drill a test well and spend $13 billion and not expect to have the contract to start drilling as soon as they find what's out there, if there's anything there. That's the way it works. So by saying, I want to know what's out there, you're saying, let's give this to the oil companies and they win. That's it.
Any questions? Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Pat McCarthy, soda. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Pat McCarthy. I live in northern Charleston County, and I would like to speak to this committee this afternoon about an area that I live very close to, which is Cape Romaine.
Announce it again.
Cape Romaine
Cape Romaine.
area.
Okay.
I'll be explaining it, okay. The northern portion of Charleston County has been for over 40 years considered an area of citizens, municipalities, and organizations that prize and hold dear the natural beauty and unique designation of this southern portion of a larger area called the U.S. MAB Program, Bureau of Oceans and International Scientific Affairs. It is also within the jurisdiction of the U.S. Department of State, created by the Congress in 1974. The Carolinian South Atlantic Biosphere Reserve incorporates Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge and Capers Island under the South Carolina Department of National Resources, Marine Resources Division, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This biosphere reserve is federally protected at the highest level. Also, Cape Romaine has been designated a Class 1 wilderness under the Wilderness Act of 1965. In short, it has more recognized designations than a highly decorated five-star general. Are we now poised to disclaim this pristine treasure and bend to special interests? Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge is 22 miles in length and comprises, it is 66,287 acres of water impoundments, creeks, bays, emergent salt marshes, and barrier islands. It also within it are 120 kilometers of Class 1 wilderness. Due to development on land and now the possibility of development offshore, these natural areas are under tremendous threat of total extinction. The marine areas in Cape Romaine are currently considered pristine and provide natural habitats for many marine animals as well as cultural historic sites. They provide biotic systems and environmental systems for rare and vanishing species. They provide scientific study for all of us to learn about the natural world. The preservation of this part of the natural world, in some instances, provides medicine for human lives. Currently, blood is extracted from the horseshoe crab and utilized for human health. The crab and the migratory tiny bird called the red knot coexist in a symbiotic relationship at Cape Romaine that ultimately benefits man. Without a pristine environment for them to live in, the quality of their blood cannot help anyone. Since the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt, there has been a bipartisan acknowledgement of the preservation and conservation of our country. All citizens benefit from such policies. Northern Charleston County exists from the city of Charleston northward to Georgetown, Myrtle Beach, and then to North Carolina. Without natural areas, all humanity suffers. Without a companion interest in protecting the Atlantic, the Cape will stand alone, and without its support, it will no longer be pristine, but a downgraded version of what it once was. In the words of President Teddy Roosevelt in appreciation of our wonderful country, it is also vandalism wantonly to destroy or permit the destruction of what is beautiful in nature, whether it be a cliff, a forest, or a species of mammal or bird. Here in the United States, we turn our rivers and streams into sewers or dumping grounds. We pollute the air, we destroy our forests, and exterminate fishes, birds, and mammals, not to speak of vulgarizing charming landscapes with hideous advertisements. But at last it looks as if our people are awakening. In closing, I ask that tremendous consideration be given to keeping our Atlantic coast free from development. All those in public positions must not be held sway by any other influence other than good conscience and innate human sharing of what is exquisite and beautiful. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You mentioned about the horseshoe crab.
Yes.
How familiar are you with that?
I've researched a little bit about it and learned a little bit about it. They come up onto the shore.
I'm on a committee now that part of this is under us.
Oh,
And we were looking for an expert to talk about the horseshoe crabs. And
oh.
most people didn't know horseshoe crabs have blue blood. Did you know that?
I didn't know the color of their blood.
Right. Do you know how much the people pay to harvest those horseshoe crabs?
I don't know, but I think that there's
Very little.
Oh, very little?
Right.
Oh,
Some we've been told that the horseshoe crab was able to be turned loose
yes.
and able to live again. But it's a very seasonal thing. And,
Right.
Our state is giving away a resource,
Yes,
and we're charging very little for it.
that's true.
So I just wanted you to know that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Now you're an
Oh,
expert.
I don't
No,
think
you're not.
so.
No, you slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night, right? No. Thank you very
No,
much for your
I
testimony.
drove early this morning.
Right. Samantha. Huh? Oh, okay. They said, oh, you, come on. I've already called your name, Samantha Siegel, Oceana. Thank you. And this will be the last one before we take a break. And we'll be back at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much for being here. Tell us who you are.
Thank you very much for having me. My name's Samantha Siegel. I work for Oceana. It's an international nonprofit dedicated to protecting the world's oceans. I live in Charleston, but I cover South Carolina and Georgia. So I have the opportunity to talk to people about offshore drilling and seismic blasting all day, 5 days a week, sometimes more than that. And it's really not a difficult argument. It's very simple. It's not that complex. There's no benefits right now for the states. There's no revenue sharing. We won't see the seismic data. So it's a very simple issue. So thank you for giving the public the opportunity to speak on this critical issue. It's clear that Atlantic coastal communities, elected leaders, and other stakeholders do not want offshore oil and gas development, including offshore drilling and seismic airgun blasting. We will never support the destruction of our ocean, which supports our economies and our way of life. Our state's fisheries and ocean-based tourism and recreation support nearly 79,000 jobs and generate over $4 billion in economic activity each year in South Carolina. 141 municipalities in East Coast states have formally opposed oil and gas development in the Atlantic, as you've heard, including 100% of South Carolina coastal towns and cities, and also our capital city of Columbia has also passed a resolution opposing seismic blasting and offshore drilling. Together, these municipalities represent over 90% of the coastline that would be at direct risk from seismic air gun blasting. Additionally, over 1,200 federal, state, and local legislators have opposed oil and gas exploration or development in the Atlantic. The Business Alliance for the Protection of the Atlantic Coast, which formed last September in Myrtle Beach and represents more than 12,000 businesses and 500,000 fishing families from Georgia to Maine, has also voiced opposition to offshore oil and gas exploration and development in the Atlantic. The numbers speak for themselves. The Quest study that was mentioned before, which is a study favoring offshore oil and gas development, projected that offshore drilling will bring over 35,000 new jobs in South Carolina by 2035 and generate $3.728 billion in revenue to South Carolina by 2035. By contrast, offshore oil and gas development off the state of South Carolina could put at risk some of the 79,000 jobs and $4.4 billion in gross domestic product each year that rely on the state's healthy ocean ecosystems, mainly through fishing, tourism, and recreation. So offshore drilling would threaten much larger numbers of steady jobs and state revenues for a much smaller potential jobs from drilling. Most of us know how important it is to protect our coast. For decades, coastal communities along the Atlantic seaboard have been fighting the oil industry's attempts to open our coast to oil and gas development. For years, South Carolina's coastal communities, from Hilton Head to Charleston to Georgetown to Myrtle Beach, have been asking the federal government and our state leaders to prioritize the coastal resources and industries that our communities depend on, rather than the multi-billion-dollar international corporations that are behind the politicized drive to drill off our coast. We will continue to fight to protect our coast for as long as it takes, as we always have. We're grateful to stand with leaders like Mayor Kaiserling, Mayor Tecklenburg, Mayor Goodwin, Councilman Lazarus, and Councilman Joseph, who understand the value of a healthy and productive coast, and hope that you all will stand with us and oppose offshore drilling and seismic airgun blasting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have a question? Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And at this time, we'll take a lunch break. I got about 12:18. We'll be back at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.